GitHub suffered a really serious distributed denial of service attack in 2015, and specifically they had two GitHub repositories targeted. One of them was greatfire.org, which monitors Chinese internet censorship, and the other one was the Chinese version of the New York Times. You may see a bit of a theme here with the nature of both of these repositories. Now, these are both mirror sites, and the thing about them being mirrors on GitHub is it makes it really hard for them to be censored. China has a very strict censorship regime, but short of censoring all of GitHub altogether and locking out those thousands and thousands of code repositories and services from Chinese citizens, it's actually very difficult for them to block specific repositories like these two here. What we saw happen in 2015 was Chinese infrastructure actually mounting a man-in-the-middle attack against external parties browsing resources inside China. And in fact, what was happening is when requests were made to Baidu's analytics, so Baidu is a large search engine, think of it as the Chinese version of Google, and their analytics is like Google Analytics, it's embedded on many different pages. So when these requests were coming in for Baidu Analytics, they were substituted with the script which would cause the browser to attack GitHub. Let me show you an illustration of how this worked. So let's imagine we have a user, and this user is outside China, but they want to browse a Chinese website, so one that's actually within the Great Firewall of China. They make a request for the site, which has to pass through Chinese internet infrastructure. Now, that infrastructure allowed the request to pass through to the legitimate website that the user wanted to browse to. The request wasn't modified in any way. The response came back from the website, and then as it passed back through that Chinese internet infrastructure, it was modified. What the modification did is it took that Baidu Analytics script and changed it such as the user, the legitimate innocent user in some part of the world, started making requests for one of those two GitHub repositories. And it didn't just cause one request either. It just kept going and going and going. This was a script which caused the browser to just continually make requests out to GitHub. Now imagine what would happen if you had thousands, tens of thousands, possibly even hundreds of thousands of people browsing Chinese websites all through that Chinese internet infrastructure and all getting that malicious script which then caused them unknowingly to start making requests to GitHub. That would put an enormous load on GitHub. That is an HTTP flood attack. And in fact, we know exactly what the script that did this looks like. Let me show you. So here's the script that replaced the legitimate request to Baidu's analytics. I won't go through the whole thing, but some of the key parts here is it embeds jQuery. It later declares a URL array, which is the sites that it would like these otherwise very innocent browsers to start making requests to. And then further down the page, it calls jQuery's AJAX function to issue a request to one of the targets. And it just keeps going. It goes over and over and over again. And this becomes what's referred to as a man-on-the-side attack, because you've got all of these legitimate, honest, innocent users browsing around websites in China and inadvertently sending these requests out the side, if you like, to one of these GitHub repositories. Now think about this from GitHub's perspective as well. It's hard to defend against that sort of attack because you've got a great big range of different IP addresses, different request headers, very innocent looking traffic. It just happens to be concentrated around two particular repositories. Incidentally, this is also a really good example of the need for HTTPS. This traffic could only be intercepted and modified because the request was not encrypted. That's tangential to the story about distributed denial of service, but I thought it was another interesting point to come from this exercise. All in all, this entire attack ran for 5 straight days, from when they originally identified a DOS attack was taking place to when everything was back to normal. GitHub actually did an amazing job of fending off this attack. And to this day, those repositories still remain in place, and evidently, GitHub is now much more resilient to this style of malicious traffic. So that's a really good example of a very well orchestrated DOS attack known as a man-on-the-side attack. Let's look at one more example, and this is a good complex example of how multiple attacks are chained together.